him in the second round of the same tournament. I played c5 here, but this time I wanted to surprise my opponent, and I had in my repertoire this B plan in case of Tarrasch variation, and I played knight c6. This is called Guimard variation of the Tarrasch. The point of Guimard's variation is that you cannot really simply play c3 as white because black goes with e5, and black is solving all the problems of the opening. So normally what I need to do is knight gf3, after which they're not allowing, of course, us to play e5, but we need to play knight f6, e5, knight e7. And now you can say that white did everything right because black's knight is standing really terribly there because the pawn on c7 cannot go to c5, which is a typical French defense strike. When I was going through the encyclopedia and this variation, I was thinking, well, this cannot be good, but some grandmasters were going for it, and I was just curious to know why would they do that. The point of placing knight this way is that we want to play f6 quickly, and just these knights are actually working really well in attacking e5, eliminating that pawn after f6. White cannot really just do whatever they want to. I mean, with a passive approach, bishop e2, we go f6. Passive approach with c3, we go f6 again. The main lines are bishop e2, bishop b5, knight b3. But in this game, we had bishop d3. And this is like straightforward with the idea of eliminating f6 option because the king is going to be in danger in that case. So knight g5, you go f takes g, for example, queen h5 check, you go g6, they sacrifice this bishop this way. And after king e7, they just go knight e4, and we're probably done. So that's the point of placing the bishop on d3 here. The minus is that we can just go with knight b4, and we are transposing into the typical, this way, typical Tarrasch with c5, but this time they are not accomplishing the goal of placing knight on d2 on the third move. The idea of the Tarrasch is that you place the knights of white in a different way. Overall, the knight is standing here, and you're probably asking how that's possible, but that's something for another video. They do basically that by placing this knight to f3 and the other one is coming to e2. This would be ideal because both of these knights would be guarding d4 while the knight from e2 will be ready to join the attack. But this way they're not really happy with these knights and we accomplished to play c5. So that's a little accomplishment for black, and I thought that I have already a good position. I mean, it's theory, of course, but I was not worried. They castled. There is no point of keeping the pawns there because the knight of white is already developed on d2. Typically, when the knight's standing on b1, you don't want to, or you'd like to delay c takes d, c takes d, because white's knight can come out to c3. This way, it's already on d2, so we can take. And now, this is the moment where I think I actually made not a horrible mistake, but an inaccuracy, I would say, that dictated the game further. I played queen b6, and the idea is to put pressure on d4 first, and then only play f6. But let's see what happens. Knight b3, normally knight b3 you go with a5, you want to kick the knight back to d2, and if they play a4, which happened in the game, they're weakening b4 square, which we can use for our knight, which means that the white's bishop is never going to end up on d3 because we just take it. Well, I was thinking I can do that maybe later, I don't need to rush. I'm going to play first bishop e7, which is fine. This is still theory, theoretically the best move here, and white just now made a move that was a novelty back then, although you'll see that it's a very good move. Knight g5 is the move that was played in the game. First of all, you never want to play h6 when your king is going to end up on g8. But even if you do that, if you're not suffering on the king side yet, the knight is going to h3, f4, and h5, inflicting pressure on g7. We're never going to be able to push g6. And it's not really that we want to take this because we're going to be ending up without the dark squares. I mean, it's going to be completely under control of white. We may even need to tolerate this knight standing on g5. So what we want to do here is black. We don't want to play h6. We don't want to castle. We're going to run to a problem. We'd like to at least prevent bishop d3, because if this happens and the queen is coming to h5, we're already done. So the move is knight b4. And I was still thinking I have a good position. Later I'm going to maybe go with knight b8, knight c6, f6, maybe even castling soon, and then f6. But knight b4 is serving not to allow bishop d3. Imagine how surprised I was when I saw bishop d3. It's ridiculous. How can he surrender this light square bishop? If you remember, earlier in the game, I played knight b4 and he went from d3 to e2. But this time he's going back to d3. He's offering this bishop. And the whole point is that he's going to activate his queen this way. So I took it, of course, and after queen d3, you can see now we cannot castle. According to the engine, I think h6 is required at this point, although it's just going to move the knight to the right direction. But it's required in order to castle. I think I would go probably from knight f8, knight g6, in which case you can see maybe f4, f5 coming. And it's not really that safe. Also h4 maybe there soon and h5. Also problematic for the knight on g6. The computer is suggesting queen d8, which I'm not so sure about. I don't know really what's the point. They can just go knight h3. I guess that's the point, is that we're not going to go h6. At least we're not weakening our king's position in order to castle. But as you can see, it's quite passive. What I did is actually the worst possibility here for black, by far. You may even try to guess, but it shouldn't be like a guess the move moment. It's bishop takes g5. Look at this pawn formation. You have light square pawns, and your dark squares are terrible, especially if you give up the dark square bishop, and that's exactly what I did here. And after bishop takes g5, this is already winning for white. So I castle here, that was the reason to take the knight, I guess. Bishop e7, rook e8, bishop d6. Some of those would say that the bishop is actually firing on the empty diagonals here. It's not that useful, but actually it is. First of all, it's cutting the king's way out of this situation. It's not a bad bishop, definitely. And it's really difficult for black to organize. I mean, where can we move at all? We don't have dark square bishop. We cannot really go for f6. There is no point of doing that. So knight b8 was done, and this is a typical maneuver with the knight. The knight belongs from d7 to c6, and it's typically done by a b8. From this square, it's putting pressure on d4, and it's sometimes even going to b4 because that square is weakened. So you can guess the move now for white, how to continue the attack, actually to start the attack, using maybe more pieces. You cannot just do that with your queen, and the bishop is waiting for some action later. Pause the video, try to guess, but I'm going to continue now. It was rook fe1 played. I think this move deserves another exclamation mark because it's saying that white is not interested in f4. It's not risky at this point, but it requires g4 in order to push f5, which I was really afraid of. And I think white's doing really well in that case as well. But rook fe1 is doing the same thing without any risk. Lift the rook to the third rank, swing over to the g or h file, depends how black plays, and then the queen and the rook are going to be devastating duo in attacking black's king. Also, this knight can take place later in the attack if it's required. So for the time being, black is just developing. The bishop rook e3 is coming. Obviously now, you can prepare yourself for g6 or h6. If we play g6, the terrible things are happening here on the dark squares. We're not going to survive that. If we go for h6, we're going to be harassed here on the king side. Not to touch anything would be probably better here than playing f5 that I played. f5 is typically not a good idea for black because we're going to tolerate for the rest of the game this pawn on e5. It's never good for the French defense player. But sometimes, and I mean in most of the cases, it affects the ability of white to attack on the king side because we're grabbing more space and we're cutting some diagonals here towards our king, normally slowing down white's attack. But here, you can pause the video and try to guess the move for white because it's crushing. There is a moment here that white can take and just destroy black. I want to remind you to do the same thing you do when you're doing the tactical puzzles. Check for checks, captures, and threats. Checks are not there, but some captures are. Okay, I'm going to continue now. If you pause the video and you actually were thinking about this position and you thought that maybe taking up a son is the solution, you're right. Because let's see what happens. By sacrificing the bishop on d6, you can again guess the move. But I think it's now easier, much easier than before. Just rook g3. Hitting g7 and there is no way for black to defend this square. How can they do that? The queen cannot come to e7, the pawn is pinned on g7. There is no way that the rook can help. And if g6, rook takes g6 and queen takes g6 with mate on g7. It was the first moment when white could actually already destroy me, like move 21. But they played knight c5, putting pressure, adding more pieces without any risk yet. I played bishop c6 with the idea of developing my knight to d7, and I was like thrilled now. I can maybe trade here and get an opposite color bishop situation, which is still not good, but I'm getting somewhere at least. That was the plan. But now again, pause the video and try to spot it, because at this point my opponent actually found a solution to completely destroy black. Let's see what white needs to do. Again, check for checks, captures, and threats. You will spot something. Okay, so for those of you that thought that knight e6 is the right move, you're right. Congratulations. This is the thing that completely crushes black. Because if we don't take on e6, it's basically just game over. And if we take with the rook, the queen takes f5, attacking the rook, threatening queen f8, sort of double attack. But if we go back to e8, pawn goes to e6, as you can see, and then queen f7, and it's going to be devastating. I mean, let me show you that. Like, let's say after e6, black plays something like, let's say knight a6, and we go with queen f7 check, king here, bishop e5, hitting g7, and if you play rook g8, rook h3, because this kind of threat is there, queen h5 mate. Beautiful. But also, let's say they just pass the move, like playing this way. It's ridiculous, of course, I know. What happens after queen f7, king h8? Look carefully what this bishop can do. It can go here, but then we have rook g8, which is also completely winning for white. But you can do just bishop f8, crushing on g7, it's mate. Rook e8 loses because of e6, but you can also think of rook takes d6, which is the move that I played. You cannot obviously play bishop d7 because queen f8 is mate, and rook d6 is the second option. Okay, taking there leads to e takes d6, so now they're threatening queen e6 check, and after king h8, queen e8 mate on the back rank. Black can do something to prevent these checkmate ideas on the back rank, and they can do that by playing knight e7. And after this, the move that I didn't expect, rook e7, a very good one, because now there are threats like everywhere. Rook takes d7 and winning this situation is endgame. Or even greater, of course, threat is queen f7 and taking g7 mate. The best solution for black to continue the game would be knight f6, which I kind of overlooked. White can just play queen g5, hitting this, and now there is no g6, of course, the knight is falling, and in case of knight e8, you have just d7, and the game is completely over. They can sacrifice this way, but that's still not enough. We take, and we bring the other rook here, and it's game over. But I played queen d8, allowing them to checkmate me this way, and actually after queen f7, decided to resign. This was move 26, so we can consider this to be like sort of miniature, but overall it was a very good performance from white, destroying black completely, and it doesn't seem like there is an obvious mistake. This moment was the first moving away our queen from the action, from the center of the board, which was not probably according to the spirit of this position. The knights are actually hitting e5, let's go and destroy the center with f6, and it leads to really decent position for black. So that would be fine. But after queen b6 and all these things that we saw, we got to another moment, this trade on g5, terrible idea, giving up the dark squares in the French defense when white still has their dark square bishop. These two moments are critical for this game and decided it. And if you have something similar where you were crushed or you crushed someone, and it has some significance when it comes to the openings, especially those that I've covered so far in my videos, feel free always to submit. I'm gonna check and maybe analyze and make a video of it. And that's basically it. Have a good day. See you soon.